Hi there, I'm Kelly Brogan, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to say a couple of words about Nick. So, I still have experiences almost every day where at some point in the day I will awaken to the fact, like a jolt, that he's not here. And I have not been able to speak publicly, to share any information about science, medicine, or health without invoking his message. I think a lot about the nature of our relationship, that I came onto the scene very late in the game, of course not having any idea that it would be such a brief exposure. But when I first saw Nick speak in January of last year, I had known about his work, but it was actually being in his presence and hearing about a specific case story that it brought me to a moment of, those moments in life where things really sort of slow down almost to a point of stillness, and you know that you're experiencing something incredibly important. And I contacted him. He received my enthusiasm with open arms, and I did everything I could to insinuate myself into his life, to pick his brain, and to learn just about everything I could, like drinking from a fire hose, over the following 7 months. And what struck me most was what a Renaissance man he was, but really beyond anything I'd ever encountered before in my life. He was a type of, I don't know, like a gifted soul, right? Where he was able to access swaths of wisdom that I think most of us could spend our entire lives reading books about and trying to amass, knowledge around and fail and fall short. He seemed to know everything about everything, and I began to experience him as really like a psycho-spiritual father, and much more than the mentor I'd never had in my entire life, but somebody that I felt was really almost here in many ways to guide me and maybe even protect me. I thought, well, if I ever lose my medical license, I know who I'll put on speed dial. Nick will know what to do and will be able to help me. And it remains the case that I keep a list of questions to ask him every day, and sometimes I even write him emails, just because there's been such a profound spiritual transformation that I've experienced since his death, and because of his death, that I want to share with him what I'm learning about fighting the good fight, and what I'm learning about standing up for the truth, which is really what he told me is the most important thing. He told me that my only job every day is to love the truth. And so I'm doing my best to do that. I'm doing my absolute best to honor him, because I feel that he is the single most important figure in the history of modern medicine. And beyond that, he was and actually remains a healer, a true healer. And it was because of his deep respect for the natural world and for the complexity and sophistication of this human organism, and his incisive intellect, and his ability to really see through the myths and the lore of conventional medicine, that we now have the opportunity to really appreciate what nutritional medicine is capable of. And that's what I hope to continue to do in his honor every day of my life. So I bow down in gratitude for having had the exposure and experience with him. My heart swells with love for him and for everyone in his life, and all of his patients and all the lives that he's touched. So I know that we're all in this together, feeling the deep pain and also the beauty of having, been so close to somebody so brilliant. Thank you.
Hi, this is Dr. Ronald Hoffman, and I want to share some of my recollections of my good colleague, Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. We got started approximately at the same time in medicine, and both were determined to look at alternatives. Our background was similar. We went to Ivy League universities. We had great medical training, but we both decided to diverge in our approach to medicine. Dr. Gonzalez decided to focus entirely on cancer. I focused on general integrative medicine, and we sort of tracked each other during our professional careers. I would talk to him from time to time. I fondly remember meeting him on the street when he was returning from one of his shopping trips to get organic meat and vegetables. We'd stop, we'd have a conversation. In spite of the fact that New York is a city of 8 million people, we managed to run into each other about every 6 months, and we talk from time to time. I remember that when I had a personal health crisis, and I wasn't able to resolve it on my own despite my expertise in talking to numerous specialists, I went to Nick, and I said, Nick, do you treat other than cancer patients? And he said, sure. And I said, can I become your patient? And he said, of course. And with great insight and very expeditiously, he solved my medical problem by having me make a radical change in diet. I was dyed-in-the-wool vegan. He got me to incorporate animal protein in my diet, and I never looked back from that time. Now I'm on a paleo diet, I'm thriving, and I do so in large part to Nick's influence, for which I'll forever be grateful. Nick was an outstanding clinician. He's a great example to us in the field of complementary and alternative medicine because he combined great science with great clinical skills. He imparted great confidence in his patients. He worked tremendously hard on their behalf. He was fabulously dedicated and so was a terrific role model for us in this field. He will be sorely missed. He was an innovator, but he didn't just follow a established path towards innovation, borrowing here and there. He was truly creative and had his own wellspring of inspiration with which he came to some very, very innovative approaches to treat his very, very challenging patients. And if Nick were here today, I'd say, Nick, thank you so much. Your legacy continues to inspire me as I pursue my professional career. Thank you for what you've done for this field.
My first encounter with Dr. Gonzalez was about 5 years ago in one of Suzanne Somers' books. And I remember being pretty impressed by the book, by the intelligence and the scholarly nature of her research. And I remember just retaining one fact: if I ever get cancer of the pancreas, I'm going to go see that guy. A few more years went by. In the meantime, I'd forgotten his name, and a friend of ours developed a precancerous condition that can convert into multiple myeloma, and went down to see Dr. Gonzalez, got into his practice, complied with the protocol fantastically. And after he'd been there 1 or 2 times, he came back and we were at his house and he said, hey, take a look at this book and see what you think of it, which was the trophoblast model of cancer. And I remember just, okay, I wonder what this is all about. And I opened the book, and literally after a couple of pages, I said out loud, this completely makes sense. This is very impressive. And then I read the rest of the book, the rest of his work. And I met him in person with my son and my partner in March of 2015. We had lunch together when I was down there for a conference. And then we had back and forth quite a lot of email. And the last email I got from him was about 3 hours before he collapsed and died, which was an incredible loss to the world, to the scientific community, to the medical community, not to mention his loved ones and family members. And in my view, the trophoblast model of cancer and its treatment with pancreatic enzymes is already an evidence-based treatment model. The evidence base is what's called level 2 in the scientific literature. Level 1 is randomized controlled trials. Level 2 is long, well-systematic, well-reviewed case histories, which we have and which we're working on an additional one. So I feel like my contribution is to try and help not have this disappear from the planet. That this is something that needs to be really invested in by mainstream oncology and medicine, like tens of millions of levels research grants, looking at putting pancreatic cell lines in tissue culture, exposing them to different levels of pancreatic enzymes, finding out that they inhibit the growth, doing the same in animal cancer models, where there's already such data, and then starting to figure out what is the receptor that the enzymes interact with, and what are the inside the cell signals. So completely mainstream, regular scientific investigation. And then on the nutritional protocol side of things, it's really complicated and has many, many components to it. So researching all of that with an adequate number of subjects and varying one little piece of the protocol and then another would be a massive undertaking, but something that needs to be done. And so I think he is one of the highlights of 20th, 21st century medicine, without a doubt. And I certainly hope that all of us together are able to keep his memory alive for many generations.
It's my honor today to give tribute to my friend, my doctor, Nick Gonzalez, and I also am here today with a heavy heart. He was a lone voice. He was a one of a kind. He was fearless. And I used to email him on a regular basis. And it didn't matter what time I would email him, I would get an answer back. And I would say, go to bed, because he was 3 hours ahead of me. But I used to joke with him that he worked like he was running out of time. And today I'm feeling that that was rather ironic, because maybe he knew deep down. His work was so special and so controversial because he had a theory about cancer that was effective, that it could be managed for life, just like diabetes. And when I first interviewed him, I said, that's all well and good, but I'd really have to speak to some of your patients. And he allowed me to speak with their permission, 17 of his stage 4 patients, all of whom had been alive 10 years, 21 years, 12 years, 17 years. And with each interview, I became a believer. And then recently at his funeral services and the reception that was following, I talked to person after person, realizing that I had been in a little church packed with terminal patients, all of whom had been alive for over 10 years, and many of them well over 10 years. One man said, I was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer 27 years ago, and I was given no hope by orthodox medicine, and I've been on Dr. Gonzalez's protocol ever since. I heard these stories over and over again, and not only is it a personal loss for me as a friend to lose Nick Gonzalez, the man to whom I went to time and time again for answers for issues that had come up that became controversial, and he was so well versed in everything. And I always felt very proud to present him to a constituency that might never have had the opportunity to learn from him, and that's what he was, a teacher. He taught me about how to keep my body healthy, and that his protocol was not only for cancer, but it was a recipe for life in a toxic world that is bringing everyone down. And through him, I felt that I could survive the environment. He took away my fear of cancer, which is probably the greatest gift that anybody ever could have given me, having had cancer once myself. And I credit him with keeping me alive and educating me in a way that now that he is gone, that I realize if I just continue his protocol, that I can expect to stay in the superb health that I am in today. He was very, very special. And he was married to the perfect woman, Mary Beth, who recognized that being married to a genius is difficult, and that she gave him the space to do the work that took so much of his time and so much time away from her, and she allowed that with love because she knew what he had to offer to people. I think that there are two ways that we are remembered in life, or judged, depending. One is by our accomplishments, and the other is by our character. His accomplishments don't need to be stated. We know how magnificent he was and what a genius mind he had and what he had to offer to so many patients, which is hope, who have lived because of their belief in him. But the other part of Nick Gonzalez is his character. He was kind. He was humble. He was brilliant. He was a maverick. He fearlessly criticized the shortcomings of allopathic medicine. And we are better off having had him on this planet. God bless you, Nick. We will miss you. I will miss you. Humanity has had a great loss. Rest in peace.
So I knew about Nick Gonzalez in the 1990s. You know, these are my early homeopathic years. I was studying all kinds of things in addition to homeopathy. I found out about this medical doctor who was reversing cancer through diet and nutrition and other techniques. And it was so extraordinary to me to see this guy that was as trained as he was to be doing the things that I had learned in natural and homeopathic medicine. That I read his book, One Man Alone, and began to research more about him, and he became kind of a hero to me. And it was some years later where I actually met him and befriended him. I didn't realize that would happen. Nick became a very dear friend of mine, appearing on the radio show with me regularly, and we would talk regularly by phone or even sometimes Skype. Just, you know, I get calls from him times where I had no idea, and we'd just chat about different things. Sometimes it'd be about patients and go over different things that could help. And sometimes it was about the science, the nutrition, and sometimes it was about politics and economics and our shared worldviews. So it became quite an extraordinary interaction and a relationship, and he became like a real brother in healing to me. And it's amazing that your hero becomes a friend in this way, and just one of the greatest gifts in my life. Nick was a great inspiration in so many ways, you know, not the least of which is because he survived such a terrible onslaught within his own profession. You know, I elected to go a different route in healing, not the allopathic side of training, and I didn't have to withstand the kind of attacks or assaults that he had from his peer group. Yet, you know, I appreciated him. He was appreciated by so many within those of us who understood what real healing was or is. And you know, our relationship was extraordinary, because to think of this man who I had looked up to, read about, and was in awe of in many ways, that we had developed a rapport, that he would call me and honestly ask me questions about, you know, homeopathics. You know, what would I do for this, or I've got to deal with this particular circumstance. You know some things about silver and therapeutics in that way. And I was just so in awe of a man as brilliant as he is and was, that he understood that you never stop learning. And that, for me, the greatest healers on the planet, and I count him to be right there at the top, never hang their hat and say it's over, it's done with. And that's, you know, part of why we're here, you know, and why I want to continue honoring his work as long as I'm breathing. The man had such integrity, and again, his dedication to his patients, to those that he wanted to help, and his openness and willing to be, you know, even though people looked at him as you know, those who liked him and appreciated him, not those who were considered enemies within the medical field and pharmaceutical field, but those who really loved and appreciated him, to recognize that he was a humble man who was willing to just open up and ask questions of those. And I'm thinking, you're asking me, right? But at the same time, there was just that great appreciation. You know, part of which is that, you know, I had a mentor like he did, who was very difficult, brilliant, genius level in homeopathy for me, but who had a very difficult bedside manner. To be around him was not easy, and so very people were put away. But I saw it, like as Nick saw in Dr. Kelly, very important information that could not be lost that was too important, that had to be brought out. And so I think we shared a bond a little bit in that regard. I certainly appreciated him and the journey he went through, so I felt for him, but he took it worse on the chin because the establishment that he was a part of initially, because of his training, turned against him. I never really went that route, so if people turned against me, I was in talk radio. It was pretty normal. And you did well when that happened. But again, I really felt for him because he went through it, but he stayed strong. And I just wanted to, shower him with accolades. Not that he needed it necessarily, but I understood that what he was doing was so important and it wasn't being recognized by many of his peers. Although in retrospect, I'm sure more will look at this man and say, you know what, we missed the genius when he was alive. Yeah, I was obviously in shock. I just talked with him, I don't know, a week earlier. I mean, we were going to do another show. It was just pretty normal, and like we would converse, and then suddenly to find out, I didn't believe it. At the same time, I recognized that there are stranger things that happen on this planet, and you can't predict. But to have that loss of a physical friend was devastating, and the feeling I had for all those who relied upon him, especially his patient population, his wife, Mary Beth. But for me personally, again, I got so much value out of the friendship. I felt like I, could remember that not only what he was to me, but that what I felt like I could be for him while he was alive too. To some degree, a sounding board, a support system, also a valve to blow off the steam from all the things he couldn't say in his everyday life. He'd come on the radio or even sometimes behind the scenes, and we would talk about it and let loose. And he would always ask me, was that all right, Robert? Was that okay? After the show, for instance, we do together. I'm like, Nick, you don't understand how loved you are, at least by my audience, but I know more. Anything we talk about, they want more. So we talk about politics, we talk about economics, we talk about religion and Bible, and people would write in to my show and say, hey, next time Dr. Nick is on, can you have him talk, I want to know about this Bible verse. And he would love that. We would have a great time, and of course, to be able to expand into those areas gave a great depth and breadth to what this man was all about. And I'm just, like I said, I am humbled, honored, and grateful that I could serve in that small way. Not for me so much, but for him, because of what he's given to all of us and what he continues to give even after he passed. Well, it was a guiding light for him. He's truly a man of faith, a man of God, and he lived it as such. I mean, those principles just kind of oozed out of him. And when we were on the air together, especially, because that's when he could let loose for the whole world to see another part of him, I just smiled every time that we went to these different areas. And he had a abiding belief, in that freedom that we have all been granted by that which created us all. Religious liberty was something important, because we would talk about the fact that, not everybody believes like he does or I do and others do, but that founding principle in America, religious freedom, was a very near and dear and important part of what we did. So it wasn't necessarily about having other people believe the same way we believe, but as much as it was honoring that we had the freedom to believe this way, that we would bestow that same freedom on others. And that was truly, a spiritual place to be, and a place that honored what America is supposed to be about. And so that was exciting, because we can weave that into the body politic that had so long lost sight of that concept. Everybody tried to convince everybody to be exactly the same. It wasn't about sameness, it was about honoring principles and establishing that, this is a land of freedom, and let's live up to that, expectation of those founding fathers they set for us. And so that really set him on fire too. He was alive when we got to talk about those things as well, because he loved this country and he wanted to see it restored. And we shared that. And so that was, again, an expansion of the healing we talk about, politics or political healing as well. Same principles, we got to apply them together. Well, he had a great sense of humor. He was so intellectual, though, that it might just kind of pass right by you that quickly. But I would appreciate that side of him greatly, and his willingness to, I don't know, I have a hard time putting this in the words, but it's not to not acknowledge his greatness, but he didn't look at himself in that way. He wasn't ego-driven in my experience with him. So humble to be serving in the way he was able to serve. Yet I know, who wouldn't be a little disappointed in the fact that your peers, attacked you in this way? And so for me, the appreciation that I got from him was that he got that that sunshine coming through. I could tell that smile came through, that laughter that would come through when we were together and able to release the other parts of himself that, in the constraints of his very serious position of a healer, as a doctor, very analytical in terms of caring for every patient that he was entrusted with, that might not afford that levity, in a sense, that was so necessary to balance out the intensity of what he was here to do. No, I just say, Nick, thanks, man. You were one of the best friends I've ever had. And even though we didn't get to hang out all the time in the physical, connected, but we stayed connected in other ways. And I'm just so grateful for your friendship, that you opened up to this humble homeopath with a bad attitude on radio, and that we got to share a lot of time together, sometimes behind the scenes, a lot of times in front of the scenes on radio, to share the joy that I found in you, that others could now see, could experience together. And again, all over the years, I've interviewed thousands of people now. And I can't say that I enjoyed anyone as much as Dr. Nick, and I've had a lot of great guests, because the joy that he brought, the sincerity that he brought, the integrity, the intelligence, all of those things. And this is not me just waxing poetic. I said this while he was alive. This is the man I said, I can't wait, and my audience couldn't wait. When's the next time Dr. Nick's coming on your show? So for me, it's the gratitude and the great memories I have. I'll never lose them. And of course, because those interviews exist in perpetuity, people can still tap into that other side of Dr. Nick Gonzalez that maybe they didn't know about before. And so, like I said, I'm just forever grateful to him for that, to allow me to share in that part of his journey together while he was here. Well, Mary Beth, I don't think I could tell you anything about Dr. Nick that you didn't already know, but I am grateful that you lent him out to the world, certainly to me every once in a while, and that you stood behind him like, the rock that he needed to be able to go out in the world and do what he did. And you are a great gift, because I don't know that he could have done it without you, nor would he say he could have either, because he acknowledged how much you meant to him, and you allowed him to do these things that made it possible for all of us to reach out around the world with the things that he was teaching us, things that he was giving to us, and the things that he would receive, which was also a gift. Whatever you do from this point forward, you'll do so in love. And no matter what it is, it'll be adequate. It'll be more than adequate. It'll be extraordinary. So don't discount any little effort that you do. And please accept the gifts that are being given unto you to help you to do that. But you continue in the love that you have for Nick and that we all share. It's going to be better than you can imagine. Never less than, always more than. So you carry on, and we're with you.
So my name is Dr. Wayne Jonas, and I knew Dr. Gonzalez, Nick Gonzalez, starting in 1995 when I was running the Office of Alternative Medicine at the NIH. Nick came saying that he had an approach to cancer, especially pancreatic cancer, that he thought would be of value. Nick was dedicated to science and doing research, even though he was primarily a practitioner out delivering an alternative therapy. But was very interested in working with us and spending quite a bit of time on that. So we began to work with his approach to cancer and began to explore how we could move this into good evidence and get good data in that area. Nick has had a significant impact on my life. There's very few people that have the courage that he had to come out of his practice with a very controversial therapy and really engage the powers that be, the National Cancer Institute, National Institute of Health, Office of Alternative Medicine. Without Nick, we're going to be looking for someone who has the willingness to stand up for their principles and alternative cancer therapies, to deal with the very complex and emotionally laden issues that cancer treatment brings to society. And I think Nick leaves a huge gap and represents a leader in this field in his willingness to sort of step out of his clinic and begin to engage with good research organizations to try to move his concepts forward. I think he was both prolific in his writing in these areas, persistent in his efforts, and yet willing to look at data and willing to have things evaluated right. And it's very difficult to do that, and I think that it's going to be difficult, and it is hard to find others to do that. So he leaves a huge gap in the alternative cancer field. Nick, if you were here today, I would say keep going, keep pushing, keep being the bridge between new and innovative thinking, especially in the cancer area, and engaging with the powers that be, and we'll miss you.
Hello, my name is Ty Bollinger, and I was initially introduced to Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez a couple of years ago by our mutual friend, Robert Scott Bell. Nick graciously agreed to do an interview with me for our first documentary, which we called Truth About Cancer, The Quest for the Cures. Now, this was before anybody had ever heard about the truth about cancer, and Nick wholeheartedly supported our mission to get the truth about cancer out to the world. That's what he devoted his entire life to. And so I just have to say thank you to Nick for supporting us from day one. And I honestly believe that the truth about cancer would not be anywhere close to where we are today without the support of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez from day one. And so I'm very grateful to Dr. Nick. We had great talks. We had a lot in common. We were both Christians. Nick sent me a companion Bible. We had talks about theology and the Lord, and had a lot of talks about health as well. So I'm just eternally grateful to Nick for all that he's done. He was a good man. He was a giant among men. My father was a giant among men, and Dr. Nick was as well. And Nick was not only a researcher, but he was a scientist. And the research that he had on his particular treatment for cancer, the enzyme therapy, the metabolic therapy for cancer, is very well researched. And so he was a person that really, a lot of times people that are into natural cancer treatments are thought of as not being very scientific or not being very well researched. Nick totally broke that mold. He was one of the most brilliant scientists that I think the world has ever seen, and the most brilliant researchers that the world has ever seen. So I'm just grateful to Nick. It was a pleasure and it was an honor to know Nick. And if he were here, I would tell him thank you for all that you did for us, and I'd tell him I will see you again soon. And I'm sure he's probably hanging out with my mother and father in heaven as we speak. Thank you, Dr. Nick.
My name is Roy Sweat. I'm a chiropractic atlas orthogonal doctor. Our program is complementary alternative health care. I first met Dr. Donald Kelly and Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez in 1985. They brought 10 patients down to have their atlas adjusted, and all of them responded good. Dr. Kelly left, but Dr. Gonzalez stayed, and for 2 weeks followed me around every day, talking to every patient, asking them how they were doing. He even followed me to California to advanced seminars. He then came to Atlanta to our advanced seminars for a number of years, and we were adjusting his atlas, and we told him that his right leg was a quarter inch short, and after the adjustment we told him it was even, and he said, "Why don't we take a picture of that?" And I said, "So you can see." And he started us on our program. Now we take pictures of all of our patients' legs measurements before we adjust their atlas, and we take pictures of the leg measurements immediately afterwards. Nicholas brought Mary Beth down to Atlanta to have her atlas adjusted before they got married. I told her that before you marry Nicholas, you need to know he's not going to a Walt Disney movie every week. I have lost one of my greatest professional companions. I've lost one of my greatest friends. And I say to Nicholas, thanks, and God bless Nicholas Gonzalez.
My name is VESELIN SHUMANTOV, and I was Nick Gonzalez's dentist in the last 2 years of his life. I will always remember Nick with his big heart and passion for helping people, and really, truly love for the human being, and always seeking the truth. He wouldn't care about the establishment. He wouldn't care what is the current accepted protocols for treatment. He would just seek for the truth, and if he finds the truth, he would share it no matter the consequences. So a great man with obviously vast knowledge and influenced me for implementing nutrition in dentistry as well in what I do. So I would be always grateful and appreciative.
My name is Dr. Jane Goldberg. I'm a PhD, not an MD. I knew Nicholas Gonzalez from 1983. And it's a funny story how it is that I know the exact year that I met him. I was the assistant to Ruth Sackman, who was the founder and director of the Foundation for Advancement of Cancer Therapies. And we did a conference every year. And she was the first person in New York to give Nicholas Gonzalez basically a public forum in which to present the work that he had done. And I met him at that conference. And then over the years, I was aware of what he was doing with his cancer patients and the pancreatic enzymes and Donald Kelly. In fact, there was a Donald Kelly patient that spoke at the FACT convention every year. She had been so sick that actually the only way that she was absorbing any nutrients was through rectal feeding. I mean, she was really on her deathbed. But Donald Kelly's program brought her back, and she spoke every year at the FACT convention. And so I understood what Nicholas was doing, and actually over the years have referred various patients to him. And in the last couple of years, we seemed to find each other again at different conferences that we were both speaking at. And the last time I saw him was just about 2 months before his death. And I went up to him and said, I wanted to remind him of when we met, how long ago it had been, and the circumstances of it. And so I went up to him and I said, I don't know if you remember, but we met at the first FACT convention that you spoke at. Do you remember that? And he said, yeah, 1983. And I thought, wow, oh my God, this guy has a mind like a claptrap. Which of course he did, and presented it and exhibited it in so many thousands of ways. But Nick Gonzalez was just the warmest, nicest man. He just was a gem of a human being. And I just, every day I think about him, and every day I sorrow for the loss of all of us from this planet that we were all sharing, and now he's not on it anymore. And I wish Mary Beth, his widow, the absolute best rest of her life that she can have. I have only wonderful, loving, warm, fabulous feelings toward Mary Beth, who, by the way, I met after Nick's death. So that's what I'd like to say in memory and memorial of Nick Gonzalez.
My name is Andrea, and I was Nick's office manager for 4 years. My life has changed so much since I first met Nick and was given the opportunity to work with him. I've grown professionally. I've learned a tremendous amount. I made great friends, and if I ever choose to own a business one day, I know exactly how to treat my employees, because Nick treated me with such kindness and fairness, and he was by far the best boss I will ever have. I'm going to look back on these years with great affection. I miss him very much. However, I do feel his presence often in the office. We all know how much he liked to work, and even though he's in another place right now, he's still very much here. I trust the process, and if I were given the opportunity to see Nick one more time, I would tell him how grateful and appreciative I was and am of him. I know his work will continue and live on, and I'm so happy that I get to be a part of that.
Hi, my name is Ingrid. I work as a general practitioner in Austria, and it is my pleasure to share about Nick. I first met Nick in 1993. He had just moved his office to 36th Street, and I started working there as an office assistant. In the beginning, I had no idea about medicine and certainly no clue about the therapy that Nick was doing. All I knew was that Nick was treating very sick cancer patients, most of them stage 4, who had no hope. Until then, I thought that cancer patients had to die eventually. I had no idea that there could be a cure for cancer. I saw many patients coming in for the first time in a wheelchair, and then 6 months later they would come in for their second appointment walking. And I thought, how could that be? One time I had the chance to sit in one of Nick's sessions. He was treating a patient who was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, stage 4, 10 years ago. Nick asked him how he was doing, and he said, well, for somebody who is supposed to be dead since 10 years, I'm doing great. I was blown away. I had never seen anything like that before. I was also very impressed by the way Nick treated his patients. He was so compassionate, he was so smart, and he did everything to help his patients. After about 1.5 years, I went back to Austria to study medicine myself because I really liked the idea of being able to help people so that they could get well again. After my internship in Austria, I moved back to New York to be trained by Nick. I had the great chance to learn a lot from Nick. Nick is the smartest doctor that I knew and the most compassionate. He loved his patients. And he spent hours and hours reading the latest studies and journals so he would be up to date. Nick was the greatest doctor there was. He will be missed forever, and he always will be my hero because no one cared and loved and did more for his patients than Nick did. I was totally shocked when I heard that Nick had passed away because the world has lost a great doctor, in my opinion, the greatest doctor there will ever be. I'm so grateful and so lucky that I had many months that I could spend with Nick and learn from him. And I will be forever grateful that I had the chance to do that.
Hi, I'm Rick Jaffe. I'm a healthcare lawyer, and I'm here today to talk about Nick Gonzalez. I guess I've known Nick for the better part of 30 years. I first met him in the 1980s. He was a client of my firm, and I only met him a couple times back then. My first impression, well, actually, I thought he was a law student coming in for an interview. And that's the thing about Nick. He had this boyish good looks, but he looked really young. I think at the time he must have been in his mid-30s, but he looked like he was still in school or just out. The other thing that was memorable to me about him, he was a really good talker, very smooth, and a very, very effective communicator. I remember him telling me about the internship he did with Robert Good and how he'd been a journalist. And of course, he was just starting the Kelly protocol back then. Kind of lost touch with him for maybe a dozen years or so. And then in the 90s, we reconnected. He was having some problems with Kelly. I think Kelly was jealous of the fact that Nick was becoming this rock star in cancer. And Kelly hadn't been. He had troubles for a long time, and I guess in part because he was a dentist trying to treat cancer. So Nick really made a lot of inroads in the cancer community, and I think Kelly was jealous, and so Kelly started suing Nick over and over again for defamation, for messing up the treatment or something like that. So at some point he asked me to help him, and I did, and eventually we had Kelly barred from the courthouse in Pittsburgh, where he filed all these crazy lawsuits. Did some other work for Nick too, which required me to hang around his office a little bit during the 90s. And what struck me as really interesting and fun was that he always had a lot of people come, and some of whom were quite notable. I remember one time we had dinner, me, him, and the Secretary General of NATO. I think he was a German Air Force general. And here's this big, powerful guy who in charge of an army of tens or hundreds of thousands of people. Before he orders, he looked at the menu and he says, "Nick, you're my doctor. Can I have the pasta?" And I thought that was pretty funny for coming from such a powerful guy. And You know, Nick says, sure, just this once you can have the pasta, something like that. Suzanne had a lot of fondness and admiration towards Nick. And also, she's a pretty loyal person from everything I can tell. So I think she wanted to keep him in, but she was getting enormous pressure from her people. They said that she'd lose sales, that if she was really going to do a book on the alternative cancer community, it was just inconceivable that she could have a book without Nick Gonzalez. He was essentially one of the two greatest cancer practitioners in the alternative health movement. And the idea that he would be excluded, in my mind, was unthinkable. I said, it's just not an option. Either you do the book with him or, I don't know, do another hormone book or something. So I'm sure people didn't like that. And I'm sure it will be remembered as one of the great pioneers of the alternative cancer movement. I'm only sorry he didn't live to be around a little longer to see what's going to happen next. So here's to you, Nick. Rick Jaffe signing out.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Landsman. I first met Nick in July of 2010, thanks to an introduction by Charlotte Gerson, who I was doing work with at the time. Anyway, over the years, Nick and I would do a lot of radio shows together, live events, and he would do a lot of videos for me for Natural Health 365, which was my website. And I know you know this already about Nick, but his intelligence was incredible. His passion for his work was amazing. And more than anything else, I was really impressed with his open-mindedness to all of the ideas that we would talk about. Over the years, more than anything else, though, what really impressed me about Nick was the fact that he was so generous with his time, with me and all the work that we did together, even after hours of working with cancer patients on a daily basis. It's just incredible. And if Nick was here right now, and I know he's listening, I would want to say something I know that a lot of people would agree with, and that is that, Nick, we love you, and we miss you very much here on Earth. And more importantly than anything else, we will never forget your work and do everything we can to make sure it stays alive and well. Thank you, Nick, for everything.
Nick and I both shared a dream. When you can show a patient that his tumor goes from the red to virtually disappeared with non-invasive technologies, you verify the fact that his treatment worked and that the message gets out to more people. So Nick and I did share a dream. We wanted to improve health through non-invasive diagnosis and non-invasive treatments. It was difficult for patients to believe in blood tests, but when we started sharing our work together and visually showed them success or sometimes lack of success, they were able to see that they had the courage to continue, and if they needed alternate treatment, to shift programs and do something that would work better. What I'm trying to do is honor his name and continue his legacy by writing a textbook about breakthroughs in medical thinking. And I hope this book will keep his memory alive by allowing future generations of doctors to carry the torch of new ideas in medicine to create a future that didn't exist before. So hats off to Nick Gonzalez for his medical breakthroughs, and we miss him greatly.
I met Nick Gonzalez through Carol Alt about a year ago. I had actually met him many times at conferences over the years, but it wasn't until the last year or so that I got to know him, and we had Nick Gonzalez and I had several conversations together about the role of electromagnetic fields and health. He was extremely concerned about the proliferation of wireless technologies for his patients and for all of us. When I think of Nick Gonzalez, I think of someone with integrity. Nick Gonzalez symbolized professional excellence. He cared so very deeply about his patients and about what we were doing to the environment that is affecting all of us. Why did Nick Gonzalez have such loyal patients? Because he was loyal to them. He brought them a natural medicine that did no harm and that resolved cancer and other conditions in a way that was totally health supporting to them. When I think of Nick Gonzalez, I think of someone who is truly committed to results. When I think of Dr. Nick Gonzalez, I think of somebody that I could trust. Someone who was honest, genuine, thorough, and exceptionally smart. And he connected with people in a meaningful way. The passing of Nick Gonzalez is a huge loss, but his legacy and his love will live on. I know that there's an invisible dimension, and I believe that Nicholas Gonzalez is there, liberated and free. His presence is palpable, and he's likely cheering us on to continue to pursue natural approaches to healthcare and to cancer, and to work together to create a healthcare system that meaningfully supports patients. I think he was a courageous doctor who stood up for the truth, who stood up for wholeness. Nick Gonzalez found a better way to deal with cancer. It was a natural approach, a metabolic approach, and a detoxification approach, and it had nothing to do with the pharmaceutical medicine that was the standard. And he was a truth teller. He stood up and told the truth about the great results that he was seeing with this approach. And he was not intimidated by big medicine, by big pharma. He was true to himself and true to his patients. There was something very comforting in being in the presence of Nick Gonzalez. And I think it had a great deal to do with the fact that you knew he was telling you the truth. He was telling you the whole truth. And he could explain things in great detail. And when it came to electromagnetic fields, Nick Gonzalez was very concerned about the biological effects and the health effects from these technologies. He was courageous, and he spoke up and spoke out about electromagnetic fields and wasn't afraid, despite the fact that this is an enormous industry that is deeply entwined with our economy that will be very hard to reverse the proliferation of these technologies that has occurred. But the truth tellers have to keep telling the truth, and he was one of them. And I was so grateful for his support in our activism. I know when I'm in the presence of somebody who is bringing their full presence. And Nick Gonzalez was able to do that. He was fully there for a person and on an equal level. There was none of the doctor authoritarian posture. He was fully present as an equal, as a servant of people's health. And I think that that's part of the reason why he was so effective at encouraging people to change their lives and to restore their health.
My name is Dr. Matt Sweat. I'm an Atlas orthogonal doctor in Atlanta, Georgia. And I'm proud to say that I knew Nick since the early 80s, and he was a colleague and a very dear friend of mine. It saddens me deeply to have lost such a brilliant man. My wife, Tekla, and I, and our family send our deepest sympathies to Mary Beth, the family, and the patients. Rest in peace, my friend.
I'm Dr. Stephen Larson, and I'm sitting here with a person who has become a good friend, as she was both a patient and a friend of Dr. Nicholas Gonzalez. Dr. Gonzalez sent her to me after he had some experience with the kind of work that we do in neurofeedback, And it was really quite an amazing connection because we had lots of things to talk about. But what blew me away was what Mary said about how Dr. Gonzalez saved her life. And Mary, by the way, is full Professor Mary Swander, Poet Laureate of Iowa.
So I was a patient of Dr. Gonzalez for 20 years, and I was sicker than a dog when I went to him. I had to have assistance to get into his office, and a friend came to me and she said, you are going to see the best doctor in the world, which was great to hear. And I'd only read about him and I thought, what the heck, this is worth a try. And I'd tried everything and gone to very prominent doctors. They all put me on vegetarian diets, which turned out to be the worst thing in the world for me. And I walked into his office. We had, he had that long walk back to his office from the waiting room. And on that walk, he said, okay, I want you to go out right away tonight and have a steak and a baked potato. And I thought, I'm gonna like this guy. He helped me through some of the worst situations. I had been in a series of car accidents and I had injuries from that, and that was my basic problem. And then I was in more car accidents as I was under his care, and at one time...
It was at least 10, I think.
Yeah, it was like 10. And...
most not of her choosing.
No. And at one point I was paralyzed from one of them, and I remember I had to call him on a weekend in the middle of the night, and he even answered the phone then. He was remarkable like that. He really devoted himself to his patients.
And Mary, you told me in no uncertain terms that the man saved my life, and he came in with a new breath of insight and fresh air that just changed your life around.
The Dr. Gonzalez and Dr. Larson, two of the people that actually believed there was something wrong and knew how to address it.
I can only speak for myself, but I know that Dr. Gonzalez must listen with that third ear that psychotherapists are trained to use and detect the sincerity and the authenticity of people's, the reality that they're living with. And he certainly did that with you. And,
yeah, he did.
And he sent you to us, and that helped a little bit too, I guess, right?
Right, yeah, helped a lot.
All right, and so we just want to both say that we just mourn this man so deeply. He was a living national treasure, if anybody would bother to appoint him that.
He is very, very missed.
Hi, my name is Bill Sutton, and this is my wife, Carol, and we were patients of Dr. Gonzalez for about a year and a half. And we loved every minute of it. Our journey with Dr. Gonzalez began some years ago by losing 3 of our parents to cancer. That caused us to start thinking about alternative health and leading a more natural lifestyle. We interviewed and actually attended different doctors throughout the country that were practicing natural medicine. But we always wanted to go see Dr. Gonzalez and never thought, because we didn't have active cancer, that we were going to be able to go see him.
We used to listen to his lectures and read articles, and one day I remember Golden saying, why don't we fill out an application, just see if they'd take us on an alternative basis. So we did, and we couldn't believe we were accepted, and were able to go to New York City and see him and become patients.
The qualities of Dr. Gonzalez that just amazed us from the very beginning was not only how smart he was, but how much fun he was to be around, and how his individualized approach towards our metabolic types and nutrition and detoxification, and just his overall caring and really just making you feel at ease was something that we will always cherish.
Knowing him was very impactful on our lives, even though it was for a short time. I've never been around such truly a genius person that actually cared and was compassionate and gave so much of himself for others.
I remember when we first met him and he was walking down the hallway, Carol and I thought we were getting ready to see Mick Jagger or something. We were just in awe of him. But he made us feel at ease. And it was a blessing because we actually got to be with him and Mary Beth on a social basis and got to know them on a personal basis. As a result, our friendship really deepened, and it's a privilege to be able to be on the Nicholas Gonzalez Foundation to try to continue the legacy and the genius of Dr. Gonzalez.
We miss him greatly, but cherish that we did get to know him, in fact.
I love you, baby.